Meet Reid Lance Rosenthal, rancher, #1 best-selling award-winning author, and unabashedly, unapologetically on the right side of the outstanding issues of our generation. But don't try to fence him in. Sometimes his positions will surprise you, because Reid is definitely his own man, with his own opinions. You might love him, you might hate him, but you won't be able to stop listening. Step over to the right side with Reid.
This is Reid Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio. Happy Saturday, Rocky Mountains. KFEZ, 101 Easy, Colorado Springs, serving southern Colorado and northern New Mexico. And Preston, Idaho, welcome to the On the Right Side Radio Network. And KGAB AM 650 and the Town Square Network, serving the Intermountain West. Hello, Montana, Nebraska, Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. And finally, 780 AM, The Monster out of Denver. I think you reach about everywhere. Anyway, folks, got a great show for you today. You know, it's absolutely perfect timing. We are watching this, I don't want to use the word disaster or debacle because that really doesn't sum it up, this mess of Obamacare. Not only the technical aspects of it, but the financial aspects of it, the human cost of it, with millions of people losing policies that they were explicitly promised, period, they would never lose, losing their doctors that they were explicitly promised, period, they would never lose, finding out that the administration knew about this since approximately June or July of 2010. They've been lying through their teeth to you, looking in the camera with that little toothy smile, and, it's absolutely outrageous. What we're going to have is more emergency room visits because 14 million people losing their policies, unable to get new policies or afford them, because that's a whole other debacle within this system, the cost of this stuff. Everything that you were told about this is exactly 180 degrees opposite. And you know what? It's part of the progressive mantra. You've heard me use the word progressive. You've heard it on the news. You've heard people describe themselves as progressives. Well, we got an expert on for you today, Craig Smith. He's just come out with a book, The Great Withdrawal, How the Progressives' 100-Year Debasement of America and the Dollar Ends. You can get it on all the places, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, the bookstores, you name it. And I'm going to let Craig tell you a little bit about it at another point during the show, but his publisher has a terrific deal going for our listeners. And it is a free book. In fact, you don't even pay shipping. How's that for a deal? And go to greatwithdrawal.com. Number one, that will tell you about the book, greatwithdrawal.com. Number two, call his publisher, 1-800-630-1494. Just tell them that you were listening to Reid Lance Rosenthal, KGAB, KFEZ, Preston, doesn't matter. Whatever station you want to use, they will send you that book free and clear. No charge, no shipping for you to enjoy. They ask one thing. When you're done, please write a review. I think that is just a hell of a deal, and thank you for that, Craig. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, and don't thank me, thank the publisher. He's the one who pays the bills. So
it's a terrific deal for our listeners, and I thank you as the host. So, listen, let's get started because we got a lot of ground to cover. I mean, basically, we got 100 years of being flushed down the toilet here to cover in, 45, 50 minutes. Well, let's start off with, because, the people of the left are masters at taking warm, fuzzy terms, cloaking sinister long-term intent, and then selling the people the goods. Obamacare being absolutely perfect, spot-on, current example. Tell us what a progressive is.
Well, to put it in a nutshell, years ago we used to call them the liberal left, but of course Thomas Jefferson, in the real sense of the word, was a liberal, so they had to start changing the terminology, and they called themselves progressives. And progressives believe, for a simple way to put it, Lance, in a collective. They believe that the masses are more important than the individuals, where our founding fathers believed it was individuals and their individual freedoms and liberties that made a nation great. And if you look at at their peak during the 20th century, the progressives were akin to the collectivist movements like communism. I know this is going to be very popular, but Nazism, which was a contraction of the German words for national and socialism,
Well, National Socialist Democratic Party. That's it. Hitler was a socialist.
Sure. I mean, fascism, Marxism, Maoism, Federalismo, Chavismo. I mean, socialism, a third way, liberal welfare status. I mean, European social democracy. You name it. They were all part of a progressive movement, and they believed deep in their hearts. And this is where I conflict a bit with a lot of my contemporaries. I don't believe that they're nefarious, evil people that are trying to destroy the world. Quite the opposite. They think they're the do-gooders. They think that they can make the world a better place if we all get together and we all work together and we all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. The problem with that is, like Henry Ford said, a lot of men want to be carried on the shoulders of other men without doing anything for it. And you can't have a society that works that way. And so the progressives throughout the years have literally debauched our currency. They've debased our currency through a welfare system, because Mr. Nixon would have never had to close the gold window if we hadn't had a welfare state. And the progressives have taught people, as you said, through fancy words, to be dependent on the federal government. If you're without a job, we need to give you unemployment. If you're disabled, we need to pay your bills. Nowadays, if you have bad enough ADD, you qualify for SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance. I mean, it's insane. And this nation cannot continue to go down this path because, as you see, Europe is moving away from this collectivist socialism attitude and moving towards
Canada.
Democracy. Yeah, exactly.
As is Canada.
You see us moving just the opposite direction. Yet I believe with programs like yours, we're going to change this direction because we've got to, or the nations are not going to exist in the form that we know it today.
Or it's not going to exist, but that's a whole other discussion. You know, so that folks understand, when Craig talks about Jefferson being a liberal, in that day and age, back in the 1770s, 1780s, the conservative point of view was, let's be loyal to the king, okay? A liberal point of view was, let's empower the individual. Over time, that's switched. And I agree with you, Craig. I think the liberals of today, not the progressives, but the liberals of today, they have their hearts in the right place. They're just not engaging their brain cells. On the other hand, I think progressives are the hardcore form of liberalism. They are the lefties, and I call them communists. There is no other term to describe it. When you take from somebody, funnel it through government, the government skims off for money, power, and campaigns, and then directs it to buy votes or otherwise at a quote-unquote subjectively determined lesser person, so that you have social justice and things are fair, right? We've heard all those words. Then I think that's communism. That is exactly what Karl Marx said when, from each according to their abilities to each according to their needs. It is absolutely right down the line of that. So in my mind, I differentiate liberals, and I have some liberal friends, and we argue all the time, and progressives. You folks out there, before you call yourself a progressive, think about that definition. Craig, tell us, this didn't start yesterday. I mean, this is a long-term, brilliantly thought-out plan, some opportunistic, but a lot of it planned, particularly with control of the education system starting 4 decades ago. What have these people done to us and to America for the last 100 years?
Well, if you want to get into the deep part of it, I think they've done to America, in essence, what was worse than what the British did in the Opium Wars in the 1800s to the Chinese, because they've basically turned American citizens into addicts. They've turned them into believing that the government, if there's a problem in the banking system, will bail out the banks. If there's a problem with you personally, we'll bail you out. It doesn't work. And I love how you talked about the liberal progressive words there, because it's so important, because if you look at the average old liberal, if you will, you're right. They are no longer hard left liberal. They're more like libertarians. They believe in freedom and individual, choice, and so on and so forth. It is the progressive that has become the radical left who believes that, well, here, a perfect example, Mayor Bloomberg. He believes he should be able to tell you how many ounces of soda you can drink, for Pete's sakes. And so it all started openly in 1911. It happened to be the president of Princeton University, a gentleman by the name of Woodrow Wilson, decided he was going to run for president. And in 1912, he gained the presidency. In 1913, the first year that he became the president, he implemented the 16th Amendment, which put federal income tax into place, which meant...
Called the progressive income tax, I might add.
That's correct, to take from one to give to another. Now, here's what's fascinating about that. It was an amendment to the Constitution. So why did he have to amend the Constitution? Because the Supreme Court for ever and a day had always deemed income tax unconstitutional. They found out that when Mr. Lincoln did it during the Civil War, it was unconstitutional. Every time it went to be put into place, the courts overruled it and said it's unconstitutional. It does not line up with what the founders wanted. So the progressive Mr. Wilson said, we've got to change that. Now, some people say, well, it started under Taft. Yeah, but Taft would have never signed the bill. Okay, Mr. Wilson openly embraced it. That was number one. Number two, he decided that he wanted to have a central bank. Now, what is one of the communist planks of the manifesto? It's having a central bank in charge of control the credit and the money of the nation. Okay, so he passed what was called the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 that then took our banking system and put it into the hands of 12 private banks. And you know the outcome of that. It's done nothing but continue to destroy the value of the U.S. dollar. And we could get into some of the other amendments like women's suffrage or the 17th Amendment, where we took away the state legislatures from appointing the senators. Now that's done by popular vote. But the point was, he took this nation and said, I don't care what the Constitution says. We'll amend the Constitution. I don't care what the people want. We're going to get what we want. I mean, when he went over and negotiated the Treaty of Versailles, 72% of Americans did not want him over there doing that. They wanted him here being the president. He left this nation for 6 months to do that and thought he was the most wonderful guy in the world for doing it. He did exactly what the people didn't want. And here's what's crazy. Who does that sound familiar of? A fellow by the name of Barack Obama. You know, we have laws, and he says, I'm not going to implement it. Oh, we have the health care law. Well, I'm just going to exempt these people. Oh, well, the DREAM Act, well, we'll just make it legal. You can't do that. We are not a tyrannical government, although I would argue that if we keep going this way, we're clearly going to end up there.
And I 100% agree. And, there's many dots. And, folks, you can go back in the archives on the rightsideradio.com. I've had several shows on the Federal Reserve and the QE3, where they're pumping $85 billion, printing it out of thin air to buy our own bonds, our own debt, and devaluing the dollar. I've explained inflation. I've told you what the outcome will be, what's happened in other countries. Go into the archives. They're easy to find. Listen to them, because it's all part of kind of the grand plan, because all of this stuff is part of a grand plan, and it's called control. That is on the progressive side. The liberals have deluded themselves into thinking it's called help. Craig, I think you've done a great job talking about kind of where the progressive movement, the communist movement in the United States started, and that's with Woodrow, baby. But bring us up to speed. I mean, Jimmy Carter was an ineffectual soul. I think that I would put him in the liberal camp, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think the guy had a good heart. I just don't think he was a very wise man nor intelligent man.
And to implement his liberal designs, he tried to pull. He was like mini-me to Obama. He increased taxes, astronomical levels, redistributed wealth, new welfare programs, built on Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, who was another progressive in my mind, and. In the end, when he left office, we had 15% mortgage rates, 18% inflation, 11% unemployment. I mean, we had a wreck almost as big, if if not as big, as the wreck we had in 2007, 8, and 9. So these policies, folks, always have the same result. Craig, is there any civilization in history that you know of that has tried to implement communistic, progressive policies and succeeded?
Oh, I thought you were going to say and failed, because I would say yes, every single one of them. No, there has never been one that has succeeded and been successful, and that's what people don't understand. See, Woodrow Wilson, because of the income tax and more importantly because of the Federal Reserve, he then set the stage to be able to start a welfare state. Keep in mind, up till 1910, America was never a welfare state. We didn't believe in handouts, whether it be corporate handouts or whether it be individual handouts. And then, of course, the stage was set because without a Federal Reserve that can print money out of thin air, you can't have a welfare state. So when Mr. Roosevelt took office, who I happen to believe is one of the most damaging presidents we've ever had, when he put together Social Security and the Works program, he was able to do that because he had a Federal Reserve cooperating. And then, as you said, the liberal Mr. Johnson fulfilled the Great Society, which then they really started cranking money out. Well, what happened after that? 1971, Mr. Nixon is forced to close the gold window because the Federal Reserve had created so much money in order to support a welfare state that we couldn't back our word up anymore under the Bretton Woods Agreement, so we had to close the gold window. And that's why right now, you just talked about it, that we are pumping out $85 billion a month. And I said on Fox News a couple weeks ago, everybody's talking about the tapering, Lance. There's going to be no tapering. I suggest that you're going to soon see them printing $100 billion a month, $120 billion, $150 billion. It could be $1 trillion.
I happen to agree with you. I think Yellen, if she gets appointed, is Bernanke on steroids.
You bet. And this way it gives them the ability to fulfill all the desires that they have. You know, if you talk about the Communist Manifesto, you know, because I can tell from talking to you, you studied this. Everything in America, we've fulfilled. But here's something that Vladimir Lenin spoke about that very few people know about because it wasn't part of the Communist Manifesto. After they wrote that whole thing, he said, the capstone, the headstone of this all working will be if we can create a healthcare system that is controlled by the government where the government pays all the bills. Now, what are we doing right now? Make no mistake about it. These mistakes and all they're being made. I mean, the president on Wednesday was talking once again, out campaigning for his health care laws. The reality is that's the capstone. Once that's in place and we move to a single-payer system, we are a communist nation. And that breaks my heart because I'm 60 years old. I mean, my children and my grandchildren are going to have to deal with a nation that was once the freest, greatest nation in the world, and we're going to be nothing more than what we would have looked like if we stayed under Vladimir Lenin or Joseph Stalin. It's incredible. Not to mention a 1.1 million, and that's today, dollar debt if you include the unfunded liabilities, which I might add, folks, because some of you are out there going, oh, yeah, Social Security, well, that wasn't so bad. Listen, those are Democratic talking points, progressive talking points. Well, Social Security, everybody didn't like that. Now it works just great. And Medicare, nobody liked that. Now it works just great. Folks, $72 trillion in the hole. No program that's $72 trillion in the hole works great, period. Right, and that's the problem. Everybody, and I love how you cited that, Lance, because they're all saying everybody loves Social Security. Yes, it's been fixed 5 times. It's gone bankrupt almost twice. The lockbox has been raided. They are currently $2 trillion in deficit. And it's the same thing with Medicare and Medicaid. The unfunded liabilities that you spoke about are somewhere between $77 trillion and $100 trillion. But here's another startling statistic. If you look at our unfunded liabilities right now, just taking the taxpayers, because half of Americans don't pay taxes, we now each owe $1 $1 million apiece. You've heard this.
Right, that's exactly what I was just saying.
Every citizen owes 40-some-odd thousand. Well, the taxpayers, the people that actually pay the taxes, now owe $1 million apiece. That's correct. It's a frightening thing.
And folks, to hammer this home, for those of you who are sitting here listening going, yeah, but I like my Social Security check, and I like my Medicare check, and I want you to understand, those programs have hit the brick wall, okay? The wreck has occurred. The train is like falling off the tracks. You just don't have the impact of the car hitting the ground. What you have to ask yourselves, audience, is do you love your kids more than you love your Social Security check? Do you get that? Do you get the difference between the two? If you had been handed when you were 18, 30, 40, 50 years ago, a bill for $1.1 million with a smile from your parents, exactly how would you have felt? Think about it.
What's crazy about it, if I could just add this. Most people are going to say to you, but Lance, I paid for that. I put that money away every month. Well, yes, that's how the government sold it to you. That's how the progressives sold it to you. They told you, you're going to put this away and we're going to take care of you in your old age. But they lied to you. It was a tax. You see, they couldn't get it passed as a tax. So they said it would be a government pension. It's just like health care. Health care would have never passed under it being a tax, so they called it a fine. And then John Roberts said, no, it's a tax. Okay, Social Security was a tax. They took the money, they spent the money. But Craig, I put that money in there. Yes, you did. And your progressive politicians stole it from you. And they spent it on taking care of every Tom, Dick, and Harry. And now that money isn't there anymore. When Social Security started, there were 32 people paying in for every one person that was taking out. Then it went to 16 people paying in for every one person taking out. Today it's 4 people for one person taking out, and soon it'll be 2 people paying in for every one person taking out. The math doesn't work.
Not only that, but with the inflationary policies of the Fed and everything else that's going on with the debasement of the dollar, the cost, you're getting more dollars from your Social Security, far more than you ever put in, folks. If you figure out your total contributions over your entire life as a working guy, working gal, what you're going to be getting out of Social Security is more than you have put in.
That's right. It'll be about 3.5 times.
But it doesn't buy one stick more licorice. And that is inflation, which is the other great bandit of your pocket, taxes and inflation. And the two are tied hand in glove, and is to make you more dependent. That is the whole key. The progressive mantra is you must be dependent. That is why the EPA tries to control land, which is food, water, air. Okay, that is why they are now trying to control your health services. Craig, I'm going to add something. You can tell the folks a little bit about this because I'm sure it's in your book. But what was the very first thing that Adolf Hitler, a socialist, did when he became Chancellor of Germany?
Well, gosh, there were so many things he did. First thing, he nationalized all the factories and all the land, if that's what you're suggesting.
Correct. What really happened via TARP, right? GM Motors?
Well, sure. And boy, you bring up GM. You know, I was just talking to George Norrie last night about this. You know, GM, when they wiped out the bondholders to take care of the unions, I mean, bonds have always been the backbone of this country because bonds were always paid regardless of what happened. They were always referred to as the gentleman's investment because when you bought a bond, you always got paid. You were a secured creditor. This is the first time in the history where a president, by executive fiat, all he did was sign an executive order. He wiped out the bondholders of one of the largest corporations in America. Now we have Detroit that's bankrupt. What if our president does that in Detroit and then Sacramento? All of a sudden, the strength of this nation to be able to float a bond issue, to build a school or lay a new sewer line or create more power lines or what have you, will be suspicious investments, and God help this nation for future investment if that ever occurs.
And to go one step further, not only did he wipe out the bondholders, but he took their their sacred equity under bankruptcy and every other type of law you can imagine, and then redistributed to his cronies, the unions, via stock.
That's exactly right.
I mean,
look at the payment. Look at the payment that came back as a direct result of that going into the 2012 election.
Exactly.
Go look at what the UAW and many of the others, the AFL-CIO and SEIU, look at the money that they gave back to Barack Obama in the form of campaign contributions for his reelection in 2012.
That's right, folks. I mean, your money is being used to buy their votes so that they can increase their power, increase the rate at which they drain your pockets to buy more votes. I mean, it's a vicious circle. It is a rat caught in a toilet bowl on full flush, is what it is. So the second thing that Adolf Hitler did after nationalizing was health care, universal health care. And the third thing he did, folks, was gun registry. And the fourth thing he did was gun confiscation. What do we see playing out in the halls of Congress and from the lips of our dear leader? This is the king of the progressives. So, Craig, I think people kind of have the gist here of where all this is going. We don't have time to tie all the loose ends because it's all one big ball of beeswax, and we're kind of in the middle of it, stuck like little ants in a spider web. But if we continue these policies, in other words, if Barack Obama and his minions get their way, and then Hillary Clinton, God forbid, another progressive, get their way, where do you see this country, let's say, in 2020?
Well, it's hard for me to make predictions like that, but it won't look anything like it looks today. I mean, we were talking about the 100 years of progressivism, and look, they started by debasing our currency and then turned millions of Americans into welfare junkies. And then they started using, as you said, these special type of words and psychological techniques to hurt us like animals by creating these fake crises like TARP, for example. For 3 weeks we were told if it doesn't pass on Friday, the markets won't open on Monday. 3 weeks later, an $85 billion worth of pork, and then it finally passed. I mean, right. It wasn't a crisis. But here's a point. Those were all old methods of what Lowell and I outline in the book as soft power. There was no real hardness to them. It was soft power, starting to get people to fall asleep, if you will. Okay, to say that they were here to take care of us. But now our progressive rulers are showing their true colors, and you hit on this a little bit earlier, by using intimidation force, by the brutal use of government regulations, by massive surveillance, by dossiers on all Americans, by monitoring your phone calls and keeping the metadata and saying, we just want to know where you called and how long, and we're never going to use it, or the attempts that continue on a daily basis to curtail your Second Amendment rights, or the power for you to have free speech. I mean, look at what they did to the Tea Party, for Pete's sakes. They basically held them up in the process so that they had no voice going into the 2012 elections. And if this isn't enough to show the American people that there is a naked power grab going on by the progressive left that used to be very soft, used to be very subtle. We're from the government and we're here to help you. And now people are waking up to it. They're saying, wait, we don't want your help. And now all of a sudden it's, okay, well then we'll take your guns away. We'll start watching you. We'll start putting the pressure on you. We don't like what you say in public speech. We won't give you the rights under the IRS to talk. And that's what the American people have to wake up to. All of a sudden, now that the people are waking up, they're getting tough about it. So we better be ready for a fight. Now, does that fight come at the ballot box or the bullet box? Hopefully it comes at the ballot box. That means we have to demand a balanced budget amendment. We have to say to our politicians, we must balance our budgets. We must have a separation of not just church and state, but a separation of state and business. We have the highest corporate tax in the history of the world. And what people don't understand is corporations don't pay those taxes, folks. They pass those taxes on to you. So basically the government uses corporations as a tax collector. is in essence what they do.
They also export jobs to countries with lower tax rates, costing Americans employment. And, that's all part of the redistribution theology, if you will, ideology of this president. This president, folks,
that's right.
go back and listen to my interview with Dinesh D'Souza and several of the interviews I did around that time. It was right before the election last year. I want you to understand this president views not only redistribution between the various classes in the United States as his sacred duty, but he believes that the United States is the top 1% of the world, and therefore we also need to redistribute our wealth to all the other poor nations around the planet so that we are merely a seat at the table of nations. And you can see this happening with his refusal to make us energy independent. That $500 billion a year that we pump out to OPEC is redistribution of wealth right out of your pocket. You can see this with his so we say, transmission of military arms and secrets to his buddies. I'm going to give you an analogy, and Craig, tell me what you think of this. But this soft approach that is beginning to harden into a tyrannical type state. I think we saw a perfect example of this in Egypt just a year ago. Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood for many years played under the radar. They lied through their friggin' teeth to get elected. They were elected, and as soon as they had the power, because they didn't have the patience that our progressives do, they started manifesting that power. The people rose up in the streets, and the army is now eliminating the Muslim Brotherhood. I really kind of see our parallel. I mean, it's not based on Sharia, but I really kind of see a parallel in our situation to that one.
Well, and I think that parallel is legitimate to some extent, because the American people, they don't understand anymore why these God-given rights are slowly being taken away from us by fiat. Now, look, this would be a different story if this was all being done through legislation. But let's look at the health insurance. It was done by one party, totally forced through under the thick of night. Okay, if you remember correctly, it was passed literally in the middle of the night. Okay,
on Christmas Eve.
There was no opposition to it. They never read the bill. You have to pass it to read what was in it. They snuck $100 billion worth of spending. That's why Mr. Obama was so snooty a couple weeks ago when he said, "You can't stop it now. It's already paid for." That's because they put $100 billion. And Michelle Bachmann tried to point that out to everybody, and nobody paid attention. But if this was all being done legislatively on a bipartisan basis, then I'd say we as a people have to decide where we want to go. But the American people are realizing this is not where they want to go. They're realizing that these politicians have lied to them. And that's why we outline in the back of the book ideas like establishing total private property privacy. Now that sounds fancy, but think about it. Right now, Lance, if you own a home, it's registered. You have a title to it. It's public record. Why? Nobody should know what you own. Why should you have to declare how much income you make every year? Why is that part of a public record? But more importantly, you own a home. You pay it off free and clear. If you don't pay your land taxes every year, they will take that property away from you. Private property rights have been done away with in the United States of America. We no longer own our homes or our land. We rent them from the federal government. Is that what our founders wanted?
I 100% agree. Folks, go back in the archives. Listen to my interview with George Noory on Agenda 21, regionalism, smart growth. Once again, the fancy progressive terms that mask the true sinister intent. As Van Jones said, drop the radical pose to achieve the radical end. What a great saying, right? And Van is like the epitome of it, and so is Barack Obama. So on private property, you and I are in complete agreement. I mean, private property is private property in name only, even though it is, I think you'll agree with me, the cornerstone. I think it's the cornerstone of the Constitution.
You bet. That's exactly how our founding fathers framed it as well. And think about it. You have nations that have this right now. You want to see a perfect example of it? Look at Hong Kong. They have private property rights. And look at how they're growing. They're like the Asian tiger. They are like the New York City of that region of the world. And we argue in our book, like Detroit. Detroit went bankrupt. First city in the history of the country to ever go bankrupt. It's been run since 1974 by the wonderful progressive Coleman Young. Of course, he's been out of office for several years, but the progressive programs that he put into place destroyed a once great city. Okay, well, just outside of Detroit, in the waterways there, between us and Canada, there's a place called Bell Island. Why don't we take Bell Island and make it a Hong Kong? Why don't we make it to where a citizen can become a citizen there by making a payment of, say, $300,000, and that gives you a right to live on Bell Island, and you never have any taxes there. It's a free enterprise zone, just like Hong Kong. Can you imagine the financial center that would become for the world? You'd have every corporation in the world, Lance, wanting to bring their businesses to Bell Island and then hire the people of the United States to build the stuff that they wanted to build. Why aren't our government officials thinking like this? Because, and you said this perfectly, because they use these fancy, nice little words that sounded so wonderful that they're going to make the world such a wonderful, kind place, when in fact you're absolutely right, Lance. It was all about power and control, and now that they have it, they're not going to give it away easily, my dear friend.
Yeah, I happen to agree with you 100%. Well, Jefferson, I believe it was, or maybe it was Madison, said, in the course of human events, from time to time, the tree of liberty must be watered with the blood of tyrants and patriots.
That's right. It's absolutely right. And when you talk about quotes, last night I was telling George Norrie, and I know you know George. I said I cannot get Thomas Jefferson's famous quote out of my head where he said, "I predict future happiness for Americans if they can prevent the government from wasting the labors of the people under the pretense of taking care of them."
That's right.
And that's what they've done. They have taken this pretense of, look, you work, Lance, we're going to take some of your money in the form of taxes, but we're going to help all these other people, and one day you may need our help, and we'll be there for you. He said, America will remain happy until that happens. And then when that happens, you're no longer a free people. You are now nothing more than a glorified slave.
And, further down in that same Federalist paper, he had another great quote which dovetails right on that, which is, "He who sacrifices security for liberty shall wind up with neither."
Exactly.
It is,
and that's what's sad. And you know where I blame this? I blame this on a people who got more interested in. Look, it started happening with me when I was a kid. I remember playing. I don't know how old you are, but I remember playing the game Pong. It was one of the first video games. It was this little ping pong ball that went back and forth against a black and white screen. And then next thing you know, we had these little handheld games like Tetris, and then now all of a sudden you got kids that are glued to these monitors, 10 hours a day playing these games, not getting educated. And the educations that they get are all revisionist history of where America came from. Who in their right mind can say that America was not based on Judeo-Christian principles or philosophies, as Bill Riley wants to put it? It clearly was. Look at Woodrow Wilson. He was the son of a Presbyterian minister. He was going to be a Presbyterian minister, for Pete's sakes. I mean, we clearly came from a Judeo-Christian principle. But what did that mean? That meant that government starts within. That if you don't have men that have control of themselves and that they don't believe in a right and wrong within themselves, then you don't have a society that will work, because there are laws that say you can't murder, but there'll be plenty of people that murder today. Government starts within, and we're not teaching that to our children anymore. We're teaching you get angry, go punch the kid in the nose. We're teaching, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Now, look, I'm all for defending ourselves, and I think you and I would both agree that self-defense is very, very important. But this revisionist history that we're teaching our children is going to be the ruin of this nation, and it's got to stop. You said it yourself 40 years ago when we put together the Department of Education. What the heck was that all about? How come that is not being managed on a local level by local school boards, by parents and teachers who are getting together and figuring out what's best for our children? Who in the world thinks the federal government can do that better than the local community?
Right, now they're doubling down with the Common Core curriculum. You know, it's one of the reasons I think you wrote this book, Craig, you correct me if I'm wrong, is because you want to get this real history, you know, in that focused area out to people so they understand that this is part of a plan, that this has been a sequence of events, that all of them are orchestrated along with some opportunities that came along they didn't expect. And, you know, the reason I write my books, the Threads Western American Saga series, is through a story to teach self-reliance and to remind people of who we are and where we came from. So, you know, both of us...
Personal responsibility, you bet.
Personal responsibility is exactly right. And, you know, the progressives not only want to rob us of that cornerstone of the American essence, but they want us to believe that it really never existed. To the extent it did, it was wrong and immoral. And number two, that going forward, the only way for kumbaya, to use your words, is for all of us to be a happy, mediocre collective. Except, of course, for the 1% that fund their campaigns and the bottom 30% whose votes they have to buy using the money of the middle 70%.
Right. And it's a very good point. And keep in mind, we can never have equal wealth. We can only have equal misery. And
that's exactly right.
So the progressive thinks if everybody can't be rich, then everybody ought to be miserable.
Except for them.
And that takes away, you know, I just wrote a letter to somebody who had written me a horrible letter. I could never use a language on air from a couple interviews I did ago. And I said, you know something? You know, they said, why you keep, you know, making the victims part? I said, just the fact you think you're a victim tells you your problem right there, young man. But the point was, I started the company, one of the companies that we own right now, 32 years ago in the bedroom of my home, after going bankrupt, after getting down to my last few cents. I scratched together $50 and started a company. And today it employs hundreds of people and has done several $1 billion worth of business. We still live in that type of land, but we're losing it very, very quickly. And I started thinking, if I went back today to try and rebuild a company that I built 31 years ago, which took me 2 days to get it open, just the paperwork today would take me at least 2 months to get it open. That's not how America should work.
But
I mean, think about it. If you wanted to put a new deck on your house 20 years ago, it'd take you a day or two to get a permit. Do it now, and they want to have an environmental study and an impact study and to find out whether we can't have that and grow like we used to grow. And people that think that we can, you're deluding yourself. That's why we've had the weakest recovery we've ever had from a recession in the history of the country. Enough of this is worse than the Great Depression. You said it earlier. Hey, let me tell you something. Coming out of the Carter administration was way worse than coming out of 2008. Like you said, we had, and I'd like to correct your numbers a little bit because at the height we had 22% interest rates. Okay, yes, we had 16, 17, 18% inflation and 11 to 15% unemployment, way worse than what we have today. Okay, and yet we came through it. Why? Because Nixon got the government out of the way, he reduced regulations, he reduced taxes, and set the nation up for 20 years of some of the greatest prosperity we've ever had. What did Mr. Obama do? He came in and took over the banks. He privatized the auto industry. He spent trillions of dollars of stimulus, and we have the worst numbers we've ever had in the history of this country as it relates to coming out of recessions.
Yeah, and one of the things, I've talked about it in previous shows, folks, but I want you to understand something about the stimulus. This was not $1 trillion. Once that $1 trillion was passed into law under zero-based budgeting, which in itself is a joke since we've had no budget, that money is cooked into the books. That stimulus bill is now 4 years old. We have spent $4 trillion on stimulus. It has gotten us nothing. Anybody will tell you that $4 trillion can't turn an economy around because the policies are bad, because the intent is evil, and because the outcome is not the outcome they prognosticate they want to have, but something entirely different, just point to the $4 trillion in stimulus this country has spent in the last 4 years. It has accomplished nothing. Point to the $12 trillion that has been spent to eliminate poverty since 1965 in the Great Society, and poverty levels have gone up.
That's right.
If you want a hand, you look at the end of your arm.
This is what people forget, Lance. You're absolutely right. That arm of the worker built America. And what people are forgetting is that we created all this money. You know, we created another $4 or $5 trillion worth of debt since Mr. Obama took office. Money wasn't the problem. The problem was confidence. Nobody had confidence that the man in the White House knew what he was doing. And so he didn't put all of his energy on trying to find jobs. He put his energy on passing health care. He put his energy on the DREAM Act. He put his energy on everything, the Lilly Ledbetter Act. He didn't do anything to create jobs. Quite the opposite. He did things to hurt jobs. And let me tell you, I'm on with Neil Cavuto on Fox all the time, which is a business program. And Neil always asks me, Craig, what's the one thing that you guys in the business community want? We just want some confidence. We just want to know that we can depend on what we have coming out of the White House, that they're not going to throw us another curveball every other day. Do you know right now America is sitting on corporate balance sheets, $3 trillion. My companies combined have the highest cash reserves we've ever had in the history of our companies, 31 years we've been in business. I'm terrified, I shouldn't say terrified, I'm concerned to invest that money anywhere, because what if Mr. Obama changes his mind on health care and wants an additional 10%? Or what if he ups taxes again? Or what if he creates different regulation on food services? I can't afford to take the risk that this man is going to get up in the middle of the night and have indigestion from eating a hamburger and say he wants all new regulations on the beef industry. I can't afford to take that chance as a businessman. Now, if you had a leader in the White House who people believed in, like Ronald Reagan, who went out there and said, look, we're going to rebuild this nation. We're the nation that's the light on the hill. It is going to be morning in America tomorrow. We are moving forward and going to make things great. People would have that confidence to fall behind him. But what does this guy do? He comes out and says, if we don't get this budget bill passed, the market's going to crash. Your pensions are going to be wiped out. This man has done more to scare the American public than he's ever done to make the public confident in the future of its nation.
Well, I mean, that's part of the divisive tactics preached by Saul Alinsky, and it's also a tactic of increased dependency. And I agree with you 100%. You know, from my standpoint, and, you know, my experiences have been similar to yours in business. From my standpoint, there's no way I could have built the business I have now, have the ranches that we have now. It could not happen in this day and age, period.
That's right.
It just flat could not happen. And, folks, you know, those of you who are listening who still don't get it, who still can't Google up the videos of this president, I'll take one thing, Obamacare. Google up the videos. There's scores of them. You won't lose your doctor. You won't lose your policy, period. No ifs, ands, or buts. No equivocations. Absolutely firm. Looking right in the camera. Smiling that toothy smile. And it was all lie. Now, you think about all the other lies he has said, and you think about whether you want to follow this man. You think about whether you want to follow this ideology. You think about your kids or your grandkids when you cash that Social Security check. Because the fate of future generations is on our shoulders. And I think the book that Craig has written will give you the background into this progressive, i.e. communist movement that's been afoot for a long time in this country and is now kind of manifesting its really dark control side. NSA, IRS, drones, you name it. Craig, what can folks do? I mean, you know, we wring our hands, we scream and shout, we preach to our respective choirs. what can they do?
Well, I can tell you it all starts with education, Lance, and that's why I appreciated being on your program today. I'm going to encourage people to take the publisher up on that offer and give that phone number 1-800-630-1494 and get a copy of our book, or go to greatdebasement.com and read some free excerpts and get a basic education on what happened. We lay out some very radical things at the end of the book, but we're living in times that call for radical change. Look, we're stuck with this president for another 3 years, but you said it yourself, God forbid Hillary Clinton in 2016. It will continue. We have to break the cycle. Here's the good news. If we stop it now, it's not too late. We can reverse it. We're not past the point of no return. I know $100 trillion sounds like a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money when you look at a $15 trillion economy and the natural resources that we have. We're becoming energy independent day by day. Look at the natural gas that we're now harvesting, the coal that we're harvesting. I mean, we can do this, but we've got to get away from the progressive movement and get back to the founders' principles that made this nation great. And you said it yourself. It starts at your shoulder and ends at your hand. It's in our grasp to be able to do this. But it starts with education and not just talking about it. And that's why I wish I could get everybody in America to read our book and then call programs like yours and get engaged with this conversation, get the right leaders up in Washington, hold them accountable, and if they don't play by the rules, throw the bums out every 2 years. That's why we have that choice every 2 years to do so.
Exactly. And folks, I'm going to reiterate, this is a really terrific deal Craig and his publishers are offering to our listeners. This book is free, not even any postage. Call 1-800-630-1494. Just tell them you listen to Craig with Reid Lance Rosenthal, any of the local stations that you listen on, and grab that book. Read it, pass it on to your friends. Get your friends to read the book. I can't emphasize to you, why don't we just say in Western parlance, daylight's wasting. The sun hasn't set, but it's low on the zenith. Craig, thanks so much for all your work. Keep plugging.
Hey, it was great being with you. I look forward to doing it again sometime.
Absolutely. You can count on it. This is Reid Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio, folks. We're going to take a quick ID and commercial break here, and then I'm going to be back to you with the last minute or so of the show. I'm going to give you some thoughts.
Land, for love and money. The beauty of the land provokes something primal. It fills us with awe and makes us yearn for land of our own. My land, those words evoke a sense of security and a place in the world. Yet the word land also evokes nitty-gritty financial issues, business, improvement, taxes, profit. In Volume 1 of Land for Love and Money, rancher Reid Lance Rosenthal uses his award-winning style to tell us real stories, the hard-hitting truth your banker forgot to tell you about all types, sizes, and locations of land. For those drawn to land purchase, ownership, management, preservation, and sale in good times and in bad. Reid's intense love of the land, his devotion to wild and remote places, and his extensive experience with land purchase and sale throughout 2 continents make him uniquely qualified to write Land for Love and Money. A bestseller already, Land for Love and Money is available at landforloveandmoney.com, Barnes & Noble, Hastings, Amazon, and fine bookstores everywhere.
You know, Craig was talking about progressives and their attack on private property. One of the greatest things I think you can do, this is not advice, this is what I would do, and that is get yourself a piece of land that can be self-sustaining. It can provide you all sorts of enjoyment in the meantime. It'll be a refuge if times get tough, and it'll be a legacy to pass on to your kids. Why don't we say it's kind of, your kids are going to have some kind of debt left over from this fiasco. How much depends on all of us. But maybe it's something you can pass on to them to kind of lessen that burden that unfortunately we're going to leave to some extent to the next generation. This is Reid Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio. Thanks for listening. See you next Saturday.
For more information about Reid and his work, please go to ontherightsideradio.com. There you can also click to purchase the first 2 volumes of his #1 best-selling historical Western series, Threads West, an American Saga, and Maps of Fate. And now the first volume of his new nonfiction series, Land for Love and Money, is available everywhere, or go to landforloveandmoney.com. That's Land for Love and Money. We'd also like to remind you that if you've missed any shows, you can go to the show archives on Reid's OnTheRightSideRadio.com webpage. We look forward to seeing you again next week for another episode of Reid Lance Rosenthal, On the Right Side.